right, we'll go ahead and get started here. So there's a lot of you that I don't know. So for those of you that don't know me, my name's Eddie McRae. I'm the Southeast Regional Director with NuCanoe Kayaks. And today I'm going to be utilizing this pursuit of mine as kind of a display model to illustrate how I approach river fishing. And that's basically, I'm not going to be discussing so much what to throw and what to throw at as much as how to approach the water, which directions you can come from. As we talk through this, I'll be going over some gear, but I'm not going to be brand specific. So if you have any questions regarding that, feel free to hit me up after. Just to get started, I know all y'all, but how many of you are already kayak fishermen? Okay, good deal. All right, how many of you are river fishermen? Good deal, even better. So this will hold true for all bodies of water, but especially for rivers. Anytime you're planning a fishing trip, in my book, there's only two questions I ask. Number one, where are the fish? Number two, how do I get to them? Now, obviously, for number one, I can't answer that question for you. You know where you're fishing. You know the bodies of water that you're on. You know where you're going to find your fish. But number two, how do you get to them? That's what we're going to be discussing today. So you look here at this dry erase board I've got set up down there. The triangular marks on that dry erase board are going to be access points on a river. Everywhere you see a star, we're going to say those are areas that hold clusters of fish. 5-mile stretch. So, of course, right off the bat, you know, you can always do the old school float trip. But in order to do that, it's inconvenient. You've always got to have a shuttle vehicle, which means you've always got to have another person with you. Personally, most of the time, I like to fish by myself. I don't like to be limited to having to have a shuttle vehicle. I like to be able to pick up and go when I want. So really and truly what I'm going to be talking about more today is how to approach the river when you are alone or when you don't have access to a shuttle vehicle. All right, as I said, you've always got the float trip, but you've also got two other options. You can either start downriver and work your way up, which is my preferred method. You can always start upriver, work your way down, and then turn around and come back up. Using this diagram, first off, I'm going to kind of illustrate how, if you wanted to start from that lower southern point, you see you've got those clusters of fish that range all the way up to, say, a mile below the northern access point. So if, for instance, you wanted to put in at that southern point and work your way up, you could do so using a number of methods. Of course, you can paddle and anchor and fish, and paddle and anchor and fish. If it's wadable water, you can choose to wade, combination of wading and paddling. Now, generally what I would prefer to do is put in at that southern point. If possible, I want to be wading because I can fish at my own pace. I can slow things down a bit. I'm not fighting with paddling, not fighting with an anchor. And at my own pace, I can work that structure accordingly. If, however, I am having to paddle, then at points where I want to stop and fish, I'm going to need a way to hold myself in position. So here I've got two of the types of anchors that I'm going to be using. That's actually an anchor that I made. It's 2 end caps for galvanized steel pipe that I filled with lead. Now, the reason for that, you can see how short and compact it is, and it still probably weighs 6 or 7 pounds. The reason it's so small and compact is if I'm running it on this anchor trolley right here, I can run it from the front, and I can completely extract it out of the water without it creating any drag. Now, the opposite of that is going to be this drag chain. I like using the drag chain a lot of times, but now more so only when I'm drifting downriver. Reason being, if I'm trying to use this off the bow of the boat, even when I've got it fully brought up, it's still going to be dangling in the water. creates a lot of drag, a lot of resistance when you're trying to paddle, and it's going to slow you down. So generally speaking, I'm going to use this off of the front, off of the bow, and I'm going to use a drag chain when I'm drifting back down off of the stern. Now that anchor trolley is going to come into play because it's going to let me trolley my anchor point back and forth from front to rear. If you're not familiar with the use of an anchor trolley, I've actually got a video on YouTube that you can check out. It goes into detail about how to use one. But going back to our first scenario, if I'm wanting to start downriver, most likely I'm going to wade, I'm going to tether the front of the kayak around my waist, and I'm going to work my way up in increments. For instance, if my casting distance is 30 yards, I'm going to be placing myself off of my strong side, which for me, I'm right-handed. I prefer to cast left-handed. So what I'm going to want to do is work upriver, up the left bank. And I'm going to spend my day working my way upriver, getting to these clusters of fish that I can reach. I may have a 30-yard casting distance, in which case I'm going to fan. Once I'm done penetrating that specific area, I'll move forward another 30-yard increment and do the same thing over and over. Now, if I'm hitting spaces of dead water, I might choose to just paddle right through them, go right on ahead. The other option to that is, as I said, paddling up your strong side, anchoring at those different increments within your reach, then extracting your anchor and moving forward again. Now, at the end of this point, end of the day, when it's time for me to turn around and come back down, most likely I'm going to set my trolley to the rear of the boat and I'm going to use this drag chain. Now the neat thing about this drag chain, I've got it set up on a quick link. So I've got 4 links of chain here. Depending on current, I can add or remove different lengths of chain, and it helps me control my drift speed as I'm working back down. As I'm working back down, I'm going to actually be working the opposite bank, but it's still to my strong side. Now, as I said earlier, when I'm referring to strong side, I'm referring to the fact that I'm right-handed. I prefer to cast side-armed to my left. I'm more accurate that way. My point being, you choose your strong side and work those sides accordingly, whether you're working up or down. But as you work back down and drift back down towards the end of the day, you can use a drag chain. You can set your specific drift speed, and you can work accordingly as you're working your way back down the banks. Now, vice versa, if you choose to start at that northern point that you see on the board there, and you work your way back down, you've got 2 choices. You can either use that drag chain, set a drift rate, and work your way down, and then at the end of the day, start working your way back up again. I personally prefer to shoot myself down. The reason being, if working your way down, you never really know how far you're traveling. At some point in time, you may wind up getting too far down to actually be able to get back up to where you need to take out at the end of the day. I'd much rather get on down there and have the full day to manage to get myself back up to where I need to take out. But those methods, you can see how they can apply, even with a float trip, for example, as far as using the drift chain here. How you can use that to your advantage, because not only is that drift chain going to set your drift speed, but it's also going to help your boat track straight. It's going to help keep you from spinning, because that resistance dragging behind you is actually going to help hold and tether your boat.
You use the same line for that drift chain you do that little
Mm-hmm.
thing? Okay.
Same one.
Is that it on the side there?
Yes, that's a trolley line right there. So I'll actually run an anchor line down through that ring.
Okay, I see the ring.
That you see?
That's pretty cool.
And I can trolley that ring back and forth from front to rear. As I said, the main thing to take away from that, though, is using a drift chain versus an anchor when you would want to use either or, and working to your strong side, whether you be wading, whether you be floating, whether you be paddling, whether you be drifting. The most important things that I'm taking into fact when I'm on the water is I'm always trying to work efficiently to my strong side. As a matter of fact, I've got this pedal drive right here. At times, that would be a good example right there with the Chattahoochee so high. I might actually opt. Most times I don't have this pedal drive in the boat, by the way. Most times I'm river fishing, most times I'm paddling. But in certain scenarios where I'm working deeper water, that pedal drive can actually come in handy, especially if I'm working upriver, because I'm hands-free. I'm propelling myself hands-free. So I can work myself up a bank. I can actually use this pedal drive in conjunction with 1 or 2 links on that chain to create some resistance behind me that actually holds me straight, keeps me from having to worry with any steering. And I can just slowly, consistently work my way up river, fishing to my strong side. Then, like I said, at the end of the day, turn around, I can run that shaft back out of the water, and I can just drift right back down to where I want to take out. So you can take any of these methods and use them for all 3 scenarios, whether it be a float trip, an upriver trip, or a downriver trip. But the point being is use those tactics to your advantage. Now, one other thing that it gets overlooked way too often, and I think most people don't realize this. Most people see this as a form of transportation, right? It's a boat, gets you from point A to point B. But truthfully, there's a lot more uses for it than that. Number one, right off the bat, as you can see, as much stuff as I've got loaded on it, it's the biggest oversized tackle box you could ask for. So especially in a wading condition, I've got tons of places, tons of locations on the Flint and the Chattahoochee that I can go and wade fish, but I never go without my boat. I don't feel comfortable without my boat. I don't like wading without my boat. And the majority of that is for the main reason it carries everything that I need. But also, more importantly, it serves as a walking aid or a wading aid for me. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever tried to wade the river, especially the Chattahoochee, because of these slick rocks that have no moss. They might as well be coated with oil. But it makes for some tough wading, and one slip and fall can ruin a day. So when I'm wading, and anyone that's seen me in the river will tell you this, I've always got that boat right beside me, and I'm always putting all my weight on it. It's like a walking cane for me. And last but not least, and very important, it's the biggest, largest, oversized PFD you could ask for. You find yourself in trouble, you grab this boat. It's going to keep you afloat. It's going to keep you from drowning. That's not to say don't wear a PFD. Don't rely on the boat, but definitely use it as an oversized PFD. Definitely use it as a wading aid. And of course, it's your form of transportation and your fishing platform if you want to fish from it rather than wading. So having said all of that, when it comes to river fishing, you're always, in some form or another, unless you're doing a float trip, and even at times when you are doing a float trip, you're going to run into those areas of those types of water that are going to require you to be out of this boat to maneuver. Now, whether that be dragging, whether that be trying to work your way up current, in current that you can't paddle through, which would require wading, many scenarios, but what's going to happen when it's cold? You've got to be prepared for cold weather, of course. And that was kind of one of the main things I was going to talk about a little today is, it's fine and dandy and fun when it's 80 degrees and warm and sunny outside. But when you want to go out and it's 40 degrees outside and water temperature is 50 degrees, how do you approach this safely? So, let him get by for a second there. So the first piece of cold weather gear that you'd want would be waders. I brought two different types of waders with me today, and depending on what specific time of year, what season, that's really going to be what dictates what type of wader you want to use. So to start with, this is actually a set of neoprene waders. Now, neoprene, as we all know, is insulating. So this is the type of wader I'm going to use in extreme cold weather. Freezing cold weather. Yet, if you try to wear a pair of waders like this in mid-season, say those mornings that are 45 or 50 degrees, but yet during the day your temperatures wind up rising into the 70s, by the end of the day you're going to be miserable wearing a pair of waders like this. You're going to be sweating. In which case, you'd want something like a thin pair of breathable waders, which I've got right here. So I think it's pretty self-explanatory where the uses of each of these two types of waders would come into play. This for extreme cold when you need insulation. This when you need comfort from cool weather, but not extreme cold. And at the same time, you want to stay dry. Obviously, this is not a concern if you're fishing during summer and you want to wear shoes and shorts, and that. This is mainly for, say, mid-season and extreme cold season. All right, the one thing you will notice about these waders that may look a little different than most of the types of waders you've seen is the fact that they're stocking foot. You don't see any boots on them. Now, there's a reason for that, and I've learned this over years and years of doing this. Boot foot waders are fine and dandy and wonderful for the purpose they were designed for. Well, the purpose they were designed for is duck hunting. They're made for muck and marsh. That's what those boots are for. They do not perform well on slick rock, and they are not fisherman friendly. That's not to say that you may find a pair out there on the market that may have a decent boot with a decent sole that would suit your purpose, but for the most part, I'm going to say straight out, you want to stay away from a boot foot wader when you're taking river fishing into consideration. So with a stocking foot wader, it allows you to do is choose what type of wading boot that you want to use with it. So I've got two different pair of wading boots here just so you can see examples of what they look like. And you may ask yourself why I've got two pair. That's going to bring me to my next subject. When it comes time for you to choose a pair of waders, and when it comes time for you to choose a wading boot that you'll wear in conjunction with these waders, keep one thing in mind. Anytime you wear super tight, restrictive clothing, you're cutting off circulation. Also, anytime you wear super tight, restrictive clothing, you're cutting off movement. Circulation in this instance is going to be more important because your warmth is dependent upon the circulation that you get throughout your body and into your feet. So when you're choosing a wading boot to wear in conjunction with waders, always choose a boot that's oversized. Don't choose a boot that's going to fit tight because it's going to constrict your feet. It's not going to allow proper blood flow. And before the end of the day is out, your feet are going to be frozen and numb. Now the same goes with waders. Always buy your waders oversized. Two reasons for that actually. Number one, what we're discussing here as far as blood flow and circulation. But also, if your waders are tight, then your movement is restricted. Every time you bend, every time you kneel, every time you take a step, you're actually stretching those waders. And I don't know if any of you have ever seen how waders are constructed, but basically they're sewn together just like your jeans or anything else. But all seams are then taped and sealed. So if you're pulling and stretching on those tapes and seals, inevitably you're going to create leaks. So the looser the fit, the more movement unrestricted movement you're going to have, and the less chance you're going to have of tearing a seam or creating a leak. Brings me to the point where I was saying I've got 2 pair of wading boots. So obviously, if I buy a pair of boots that are way oversized for me in order to allow for the thickness of these neoprene waders and the thickness of 1 or 2 pair of socks that I'm going to be wearing in extreme cold weather, then those boots are not going to fit me in summertime when I'm only wearing 1 pair of socks. So again, you're buying according to your specific seasonal needs. I've always got a pair of boots that fit perfect that I'm only going to wear with a pair of thin socks, and that's during the summer months when I'm actually out there wading in a pair of shorts and a PFD. And then last but not least, I'm going to discuss a little about safety, because it seems like here, especially after last week, that's an issue that obviously can't be discussed enough. First and foremost, as I said, of course, you got your boat as an oversized PFD. Never go out on the water without a life jacket. And I'm going to be blunt here when I say this. There's only one excuse for not wearing a life jacket, and it's extreme stupidity. Today's life jacket is super comfortable. As you can see, this one even matches every piece of attire that I own, Jamie Dabbs, other than this shirt. But it's convenient. I mean, I've got pockets. This is basically a floating fly fishing vest. Can you get a picture of that? All right. So, you know, I've got a pocket for extra tackle. I've got a pocket for extra gear, my pliers, extra plastic baits, such. So it's convenient. They're comfortable. There's no reason in the world not to wear one. And especially if it doesn't matter if you're wading, if you're paddling, you know, you can be wading in 2 feet of water, a slip and fall accident hit your head and you're drowned. You know, a simple slip and fall accident that could have resulted in minor injury could easily turn into death. So, as I said, just always remember to wear a PFD. And then finally, this seems to be common sense to me, but for some reason I keep seeing this over and over every year. There is no rule and there is no law written anywhere that says you've got to take this boat through a set of rapids. If you're traveling downriver and you come up on a set of shoals or a set of rapids that you feel are extreme, it's not written in stone anywhere that you've got to go through it. We're not daredevils. We're not whitewater kayakers. We're kayak fishermen. We're out there with hundreds of dollars worth, thousands of dollars worth of gear. Why risk that to go through a set of shoals that you can navigate around? Not only that, why risk your health? You flip in a kayak loaded with rods and all the other gear and equipment that we've got. You can easily get tangled in that equipment as you're going through these shoals or these rapids. So not only can it be detrimental to your health, but it's also detrimental to your equipment. And like I said, there's no reason in the world whatsoever to go through anything like that when you can easily always traverse or navigate around it. So just another idea to keep in your head, keep in mind. At any rate, that's kind of sums up what I came to speak to you about today. So anybody got any questions?
You got a question?
I got, yeah, I actually do. When you're traveling upstream, let's say you got your rocks, okay, kind of like what we were talking about outside, you know, kind of like especially where like the shoal bass like to hang out and this and that. So if you're working your way up and you come across the rocks and you got your natural V coming off the rocks, are there natural ambush points that say maybe not shoal bass, but maybe so, or your spots or whatever species you're fishing for, like to set up an ambush points that you normally see?
Absolutely.
most of your rock structure in a river is going to be undercut from the front side anyway. So as we were discussing earlier, shoal bass especially, like, they tend actually to tuck under the front of those rocks. And now you would think if they were seeking refuge out of current, they would tuck behind the rock. But as that current comes down and it creates those undercuts, it actually will create a swirl under there that forms an underwater eddy, so to speak, where those fish can just hold. And they're holding in an energy efficient manner. I mean, they're like any other wild species. Their predominant goal in life is to survive. They survive by being energy efficient. And in being energy efficient, they find those pockets and those eddies and those pools to hold in and just let bait wash completely down to them.
Is it best to target those from below there, or throw them back at them, or in front of it, throw it right to them?
I prefer to fish upriver, up current.
That's what.
That was it. And I meant to go over that point during this. Fishing upriver, and like I said, I prefer wading as well. But me wading and fishing upriver, it allows me to fish at my natural pace, my comfort zone. But not only that, it's creating a natural presentation. All bait washes downriver. So if you're casting upstream and you're working your bait back down to you, it's working back downstream.
So
in a natural
usually facing upriver when they're feeding, right?
Right.
Facing upriver.
They're always facing upriver. They're always facing upriver. They're always looking for that easy meal to wash right back down to them. Now, the other thing I don't like as far as trying to wade or fish downstream is the fact that not only is it an unnatural presentation, but if you're wading, then you're kicking up silt, dirt, moss, debris, and it's all washing straight down into the areas that you're fishing. So even in regards to doing a float trip, or if you're working your way down the river, if you're coming up on those areas that you know are hot areas that are holding those clusters of fish, I prefer to navigate around them, work my way down below them, and then fish from below them upstream.
The water's about 58, 59 degrees now down at Langdale. When do you think they'll be ready to go on bed, the show bass down there? And where, if they do, where do they usually put their eggs?
Now, I have had
Where do you go?
Hey, you gotta remember, we still compete against this guy.
I know.
You got to see him in class.
You may not be telling.
And I can tell you, where do I go? Have you ever seen the fish hatchery over in Warm Springs? They got all kind of fish. Seriously, I have looked, and I probably, you of all people, Joe, know how much time I've spent down at Crowhawk and Langdale. I've yet to see any habitat down there that looked truly shoal bass spawn ready. So where they spawn down there is beyond me. Now, on the Flint, for example, I'm going to look for creek mouths. I'm going to look for eddies and pools that are gravel bottom. They tend to like that gravel bottom in 2 to 6 foot of water. It's going to be in current or right off of current. Eddies, for example. And generally speaking, that at spawn on the Flint, anyway, it's not going to trigger off until that water reaches, say, 60 to 62 degrees. And it always seems like every year, once it breaks that, now you may have a day or two that it breaks at 60 degrees and then it drops right back down another 10 degrees within 2 or 3 days. And that's where you start seeing those stinted and stunted activity patches. But for me, as a general rule, once I see the water temperature has risen above, say, 60 to 62 for a consistent amount of time, that's what's going to set them off into that feeding frenzy and get them into that pre-spawn pattern.
At Langdale, there's not really a creek for them to go up in and spawn. Down the Riverview there is flat shoals, of course, but
Right.
Langdale, there's really not a creek suitable enough for a fish to go up in and spawn, lay eggs, or anything.
Well, generally, they won't even go up in the creeks. Your predominant resident river fish for example, they'll hold around the mouth.
They stay away from,
Yeah. Now, flat shoals is an entity all its own.
Yes,
And,
yes.
you know, Steve Salmon's doing all his
Yeah.
investigating up there and the
And-
tagging and stuff.
and
They
mulberry.
determined that those fish do a ton of migrating. I don't think you would, say, on the Flint, for example, as far as the creek fish versus your resident river fish, I don't think you'll see that much migration action as you would out of flat shoals. But generally speaking, the rule of thumb is they're gonna look for those eddies and pools with gravel bottom and relief from the main current. And that's where they're gonna set up and spawn. And of course, your males are gonna kick in early. They're gonna be the ones that create the nest. And then once the females lay the eggs, the males are gonna be the ones sitting on them guarding.
and they won't bite nothing.
Well, not necessarily, shoal bass especially, you can, when you find them, which it's kind of a bad practice to me in a way, because they are there to guard that nest and basically ensure that you have a good spawn. But you can kick them into an aggressive bite, and that's the only thing. It's not that they're biting to feed, they're biting to protect that nest.
Anger, yeah.
Yeah.
I
Protection.
don't see how they beat it all down here with this water.
It's
It's
not-
always baffled me as well, but they do.
I know.
I can take you to places on the Flint and point them out to you, and you would think, how in the world are they holding? How do the eggs hold there? How do they not get washed down?
That land, they go on those back sloughs in, they lay the eggs and all, and the males will guard them, and I mean, there'll be 4 or 5 of them guarding it, and females long been gone.
Right.
She don't even come back, I don't think, but
Yeah.
the males will stay there religiously and just guard it, man, just swim around it. And
Yeah.
you,
Well, they'll
once
stay
they
on-
see you, you know, it's over.
Yeah.
But
And
you
they stay on the fry
creek.
even after they're hatched. They
Yeah.
stay on those fry for weeks. You know, just waiting for them to get to a mature enough age to where they can fairly protect themselves. But yeah, generally speaking, that's where you're gonna find them. It's gonna be that 60 to 62 degree temperature range that kicks it in. And
Well, good, let's get there.
anything else?
When is your best show bass fishing on the Flint? Spring? What time? You know, we usually have a tournament in the summer, and it's just kind of
It
Them big ones
stagnates back and forth in the summer.
well, the more big ones. They hard. It's like finding a needle in a haystack in the summer.
Yeah, they spread out, and it's not necessarily looking for them like a needle in a haystack. It's just knowing those little nuances that you'll just develop an eye for, knowing where those big fish are going to hold. But the point being, they're not all holding together like they do during the spring.
Right, right.
They're not all bunched up like Jody said. You'll see 4 or 5 guarding one nest a lot of times. Now during the spring, when you find those areas like that, you can crush them.
Yeah.
But there's still a downside to that, and there's an ethicality to it that I don't necessarily agree with. Because, like I said, they're the fish that are ensuring that you have a good spawn for the following year.
Right.
Do you really want to be detrimental to that nest? You really want to do anything that might possibly hurt that nest by drawing all of the garden fish off of it? And you know as well as I do, you catch a fish, that's a traumatic experience for that fish. He's traumatized.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You catch him and you're as careful as you can be with him, but he's still traumatized, and he's not going to go back into a natural habit or a natural routine for it could be days or weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So there's nothing that ensures that once you caught him and you snatched him off that nest that he's going to go back and guard that nest.
That makes sense.
That's one of my main issues with really killing the pre-spawn or the spawn activity, actually. And again, some people have different opinion about that, and you know what opinions are like, but that's my opinion on it.
We like them better when they're coming off the bed anyway. I mean, that's when they're really fun to catch.
Yeah. Now the shoal bass are opposite though, at least on the Flint. When they come off the spawn, it seems like it's forever before they start back biting again. So generally on the Flint, you'll have a ton of pre-spawn activity where they're just super aggressive, feeding up. During the spawn itself, it's very rare that you'll catch a female fish. You won't see many of them that are just sunken and egged out. The majority of the fish that you're going to catch during that time is quality fish, your bigger fish, they're gonna be fish that will garden, that bit aggressively just from guarding that nest.
From anger.
But then after those eggs have hatched, and even after weeks of those males guarding that fry, it still seems like it's a month or two before they finally kick back in and start to bite real good.
So you say like the second week of May or something, probably ain't all that great.
No, I mean,
Good.
because they'll actually spawn on to June.
Yeah, that's good, because that way maybe it'll suck over there at Three River. I can win that.
Well, largemouth, when they come off there, they're straight to hunger. They go to bite, especially the shamans.
Well, and the shoal bass, you would think they'd be starved,
Yeah, but they're not.
but they just don't. It takes them a lot longer to kick back in.
And this river down here, man, you cannot pattern this river. You'll have days it's dynamite, and tomorrow nothing on it.
with no rhyme or reason to it. And the Flint's the same way.
Yeah.
But now, once that pre-spawn aggressiveness is behind us with shoal bass on the Flint, to me it doesn't seem like it gets good again until July. And everybody else can't stand it. They'd rather stay off the river. They don't like that July heat. They don't like the low water. But it is actually working to your advantage if you think about it, because that low water creates those pools that basically trap fish in certain areas.
Mm-hmm.
You know, your bigger fish are going to be looking for cool water to hold in. And when the majority of the riverbed is dry, but yet you've got deep pools sporadically located here and there, it's easy pickings in my book.
Yeah.
But it takes work. You know, once the river gets real low like that, it's not an enjoyable float trip. You're dragging a lot. If you're waiting, you're still working yourself to death and dragging a lot. But then again, that's what we're out there for. Any more questions? No? Okay.
Awesome.